This is Najma Minhas, editor Global Village Space. Today I have with me Sardar Masood Khan, who is the president of Azad, Jammu and Kashmir. He has been the former ambassador to China. He's fluent in Chinese and is considered a China expert. I have him today for our viewers to understand what is the implications of the recent India-China tensions on the global order and more specifically Kashmir. I've also have with me Dr. Moeed, Pirzada, prominent TV anchor and political commentator who will participate in this discussion. We thank you so much for joining me. And Sardar Sahab. Sardar Sahab, tell me, what is the implications of Modi's recent visit to Ladakh?
Symbolically for India it is significant because he's tried to assuage the fears and apprehensions of his own population and boost the morale of the Indian armed forces. I think he has miserably failed.
Why do you say so?
Achieving these two objectives, because if you look at the content of his speech, he's trying to deceive his people and he's making claims which are not true. He projects a muscular image of the armed forces of India.
But Mr. President, we have also seen a very strange thing. You know, it has been reported that instead of the usual standard slogan of the Indian military, which is Jai Hind, they have raised the slogans that Vande Mataram and Bharat Mata Ki Jai. What is the significance of that?
This is yet another step towards saffronization of the national institutions. Previously, the populace of India was being forced to chant the slogan of Bharat Mata Ki Jai and Vande Mataram, and minorities were resisting. Of course, I mean, they do respect the Indian constitution, the diversity and pluralism of Indian society, but they did not want to subscribe to just one worldview or one religious view. I think that...
But Mr. President, let me come into it. This is a military machine, a gigantic military machine, perhaps the second largest military machine after China, which has nuclear weapons, tactical weapons, everything. And here you see is the saffronization of that military machine, the Hinduization. What is the significance for the world order and you know how the world sees that?
I think that the nuclear weapons or nuclear arsenals that India has are unsafe in the hands of the Bharatiya Janata Party and Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh leadership. You would recall that Mr. Narendra Modi has twice threatened Pakistan with the use of nuclear weapons. Last year he had said that he would use these nuclear weapons and wipe Pakistan off the map of the world. And early this year, on their Republic Day, he said that he would destroy Pakistan in 7 to 10 days. And he said that he would use nuclear weapons. So they have this distinction, infamous distinction of being the only nuclear state whose head of state has threatened a neighbor with the use of nuclear weapons.
China has also criticized him for using the word expansionism with reference to China. And this comes on top of the recent banning that India has done on the 59 apps. Do you see these moves as aggravating tensions rather than reducing tensions?
If you're talking about expansionism in the region, you will have to look at India. India is practicing expansionism, Lebensraum, and irredentism. Because, I mean, look at their history. They've been occupying territories, territory after territory. The occupied territory of Jammu and Kashmir, Sikkim earlier, and Hyderabad and Junagadh. So China has no history of colonization.
Goa as well.
Yes, Goa as well. You're absolutely right. And the other thing that characterizes India or its armed forces is that they do not fight armies of equal stature. They usually kill their own people, unarmed people, or people in occupied territories. So I don't think that China is pursuing expansionism. It is India which was practicing expansionism, and China has, or the Chinese armed forces, the PLA, has erected a barrier against it.
Mr. President, you know, we also look upon you not only as President Azad Kashmir, you have also served Pakistan and China more than once for 8 years. You're someone who's fluent with China, for Chinese, and you have interacted in China with the common man on the street and with the decision makers in Beijing. Then you have also served Pakistan in United Nations, Pakistan's ambassador to United Nations. So you have seen the world from that prism, that angle as well. How do you look at this India's initiation of a trade war, of technology blockage with the banning of 59 apps, including TikTok, WeChat, Bedu Map, and Indians? If you look at the Indian newspapers and also the American newspaper, it looked like this is the beginning of the initiation of a certain kind of technology boycott and trade boycott against China.
Of course, they've started off, but I see this trade aggression from India as an act of self-immolation, because they're hurting themselves more than they're hurting China. China has global exposure. Its economy is 5 times the size of India's economy, and it has a network. China has a transcontinental network, economic network.
But the argument is this, that China has developed its liquidity and wealth by draining the money out of the US market and European markets.
Yes, absolutely right. But there's a method in the madness in what India is doing right now. What they want to do is that they are hoping against hope that the Western countries would disinvest from China and relocate their industries or their manufacturing plants to India, because they would present it as a safe haven. But when they are banning apps, or they're banning Chinese companies from building their roads, they're hurting themselves, because over the years, India has become heavily dependent on Chinese technology. And they won't be in a position to sever these relations.
But do you think they'll be joined by other members of the Western, maybe the Quad, Japan or Australia, in this move against China? And then it will hurt China.
United States has its own problems with China, and so has Australia. And Japan has taken a back seat, more or less. The Quad is active because of India. And India is basically targeting the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, and the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. And it has been mobilizing the United States and others to oppose India's initiative. Of course, under President Trump, United States also has been hostile to the Belt and Road Initiative. So there is a coalition there. But I don't think that this coalition has the capacity to oppose China's juggernaut effectively.
But if you look increasingly, the arguments by analysts and academics and foreign affairs and American media, they say that India, which was indecisive and had not taken a clear position along with the United States, the West, now will come up very strongly in Quad and with the Western alliance against China.
Well, India has been trying to do United States bidding for a long time. I mean, the whole process started in 1995. People have short memory, but I think that all these administrations, administrations preceding President Trump's administration, they have used India as a proxy or a counterweight against China, but they haven't succeeded. There are a number of reasons. One is that India is not sincere in this commitment. Second, there's complementarity between Indian and Chinese economy, and this complementarity has been growing. And there's a complementarity between the economies of the United States and China.
It's interesting when you say the complementarity between India and China.
Yes.
When you look from the Chinese prism, they have not done any propaganda. They haven't unleashed a straight propaganda against India, despite the standoff in Ladakh. I mean, their communist publications and everything. India is aflame with an anti-China sentiment. I'm wondering if Chinese see the Ladakh as a border standoff and they don't really want to spoil their overall relationship with India. India, on the other hand, being a more open system, is now totally geared and filled with very strong emotional anti-China feeling. So do you think the Chinese standoff is actually backfiring on them?
Not at all. You mean on the Chinese or on the Indians?
On the Chinese. They would not like to lose India to the West.
No. Chinese are very confident, as a matter of fact. I mean, they've mobilized their troops. They're very confident. They're securing their borders. They think that Aksai Chin is a part of Xinjiang. They also have concerns about Tibet, what India is up to in that region. So they are very confident. Let me tell you the crux of the matter. The basic dynamic is that India is trying to deal with its discomfiture, which is very evident, which has been captured on the camera. they've lost their soldiers there. It is a repeat of 1962. In fact, they have made the same miscalculations as they did during the Nehru period. And they're trying to salvage themselves as a nation. They are trying to salvage their image as a muscular nation under the leadership of Narendra Modi. And what are they doing? They go running to Moscow for new weaponry. They're buying MiG-29 or Sukhoi 30. And then they are importing Rafale from France and all that. And they want to beef up their arsenals. And so there's a flurry there. Why?
But what would be Russia's role then? I mean, since Russia has been an old ally with India, will Putin and Moscow help mediate between China and India, where US cannot?
I don't think that they would mediate. The United States can not mediate either, because I said in some context that the United States cannot mediate between China and India because China cannot mediate between the United States and Mexico if a situation arises between those two countries.
Right.
So it is as counterintuitive as it would be in that situation. Russia would like to stay neutral, but they would sell their arms and armaments to India.
You know, I'd like to ask you about the apps. The fact that India has banned them, they've declared that the reason is security concerns. Now, what implications does this globally have for all social media apps, whether it's Facebook or Google? Every country can start moving towards citing national security concerns over banning apps. I mean, what implication does this have for international institutions?
Well, digital warfare has started, and all over the world. Now we are moving to an era of new technologies where you do not need physical assets. The new technologies would determine your military positions also. So the key of the critical infrastructure, critical military infrastructure of India is in the hands of the Chinese, because over the years they have been increasing their dependence on Chinese technology. So they can't switch it off suddenly. Right. But let me tell you that they would take some demonstrable steps to underline their seriousness vis-a-vis Chinese.
But what's the impact on the international institutions? Because we already had Trump, who was reducing funding for various international organizations, from WTO to the Asia Pacific region group. So with India now pursuing similar policies, saying that we will not have these apps in our country because of security concerns, what is the implication on financial institutions and international institutions overall? Will this expedite their decline?
Yes. The international order, as it was shaped in the immediate aftermath of 1945, the Second World War, is crumbling down. The United Nations has been sidelined. It is not the main decision maker.
You are saying that? You have been Pakistan's ambassador to the United Nations.
I've been there, but I can tell you that even this COVID-19 pandemic, it had a secondary role. It was only moralizing or issuing statements. The real leadership was shown by the international financial institutions or WHO, but then WHO was also undermined because of the United States.
What will replace this Bretton Woods model then, if this United Nations model?
I think that, we're seeing a pluralist world order. What I see is that we are seeing a reenactment of the world order that you saw in the late 19th century. In different circumstances, of course, this was called Concert of Europe. So some powerful nations would decide multilateral matters, and multilateral systems or institutions would become secondary. Like the United Nations Security Council, it is totally focused on African issues. It hasn't taken up the issue of Jammu and Kashmir. It is completely impotent when it comes to the resolution of the Palestine issue. So this is crumbling down, this existing system is crumbling down, but we do not have a new system. And the other question is whether the United States would be able to maintain its preeminent position In all likelihood, it would. But
it would or it won't?
It would.
It would. For how long?
But I can't predict. I can't make a precise prediction. But it has a peer competitor, and it's a very strong competitor. China, and and Russian Federation is there. But then there are many new emerging nations. So.
The Nehruvian vision was there would only be 4 major powers in the world: United States, China, Russia, and India. And now you see a confrontation between China and India.
But I don't see India as a viable entity. It's an artificial state.
This is a big statement.
Yes, but let me tell you that the glue that held it together was secularism. And that glue has been taken off. And now you see the real face of India, and it is the saffronized face. It is the Bharatiya Janata Party and the Rashtriya Swayamsevak and other violent extremist outfits. So if they go down this path, there would be no India, because there is no affinity between India's north and south, or its east or west. It was an artificial state. I mean, look at Europe. Europe is Christendom. The whole of Europe is Christendom. And there are some minorities. But you couldn't hold Europe together. It's not an empire. Even the European Union, the experiment of European Union is fraying.
Apart from Britain, it still holds.
Internal differences. I can tell you that China has made big roads into the European Union. Many of the European Union countries, particularly from Central Europe and East Europe, they would rather transact directly with China than through Brussels.
I'd like to pick up the point you made about the UN declining and becoming obsolete. What does this then mean for Pakistan's Jammu Kashmir policy?
Well, the sad fact is that for the past 72 years, the United Nations has not been able to implement its own resolutions on Jammu and Kashmir. And I'm not very optimistic that in the near future they would move towards implementing these resolutions. But I can tell you one thing: this doesn't mean that we should stop going to the United Nations, because the legitimacy of the Kashmir cause stems from these UN Security Council resolutions. And as Mr. Pirzada mentioned, I served in the United Nations, and I think that I invested some 15 years of my life in multilateral diplomacy in Geneva, in New York, in other places, back in the headquarters. And I can tell you that if you go to the United Nations, be persistent, persevere in your agenda, there would be a response. There are no arbiters sitting there who would invite you to deliver justice and hand it over to you on a silver platter. So what I'm saying is that, and you can build that kind of pressure. That's why it's very important to not just rely on the United Nations, the Security Council, or the United Nations Secretary General, or the Human Rights Council, but also mobilize international civil society.
Right. So they say 9th sense of the law is if you possess something, you're sitting there, you get to keep it. And in the case of India, they've just recently passed this domicile registration law.
But just hold on for this. We would like to have another, just take a break. But just before the break, after the break, we would like to come with a full hog on the India, Pakistan, and the impact of all that standoff on Kashmir. But one or two quick questions on the China thing. Indians are pointing out that China had not allowed or had banned international American platforms like Facebook, Google, WhatsApp, Instagram, Twitter in the large Chinese market. Yet at the same time, Chinese were having the luxury of selling their technology and platforms into India, Europe, and other places. Indians think they have actually initiated a sort of a counter-revolution against the Chinese technological model in which Chinese was selective to begin with. Don't you think there are serious risks for China's economic model now?
Not at all. In fact, Chinese goods would sell in New York, in Brussels, in Latin America, in Africa, all over the world. That process would not come to an end. And as Zhao Liqian, the spokesperson of the Chinese ministry, said the other day, India is committing a mistake, that it is a strategic miscalculation for India to...
Why are you so confident that China would hold on against all this alliance?
which
How would
alliance?
China respond to? I mean, India, Europe, United States, I mean, they're all ganging up against China.
Well, they are, but they are also transacting with China. And it has become an imperative for them. I mean, United States, Australia also is dependent on China. I mean, their bilateral trade is very robust. And the Australians would never like to lose the Chinese market. Japan
Despite
and China,
being an active member of Quad?
Yes, of course. The Quad is not a very strong alliance. And as we were having a conversation before we started this interview, the Quad members are not putting any money on the table. It is empty rhetoric. And
we've just recently had various agreements signed, both India, Australia, India, US, logistics supply agreements.
Lemua and then the Australian agreement.
Yes, but compare it with the $1 trillion which China has invested in the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiatives. And this is global, this is transnational, this is transcontinental. So is the Quad doing anything on that scale? And they aren't. I mean, they've been trying to do that. I mean, they've been trying to experiment with this idea of the new Silk Road. This was done during Hillary Clinton's period, from Indonesia to Kazakhstan and so on. It hasn't worked. What I'm saying is that China is a phenomenon which is there to stay in one form or the other. And you can't wipe out China, or you can't enfeeble it like India wants it.
Okay.
Let me also tell you that what's happening is that since India has lost militarily, it is trying to compensate this through all these gimmicks, all this energy, this flurry of activity, going to Russia, contacting Washington for mediation, and then kind of boycott, which gives a cathartic outlet to the Indian population.
Okay. I will suggest that we should just take a quick break and come back with a far more focused discussion on the impact of the India-China standoff on Pakistan and Kashmir.